The last time I came to page 20 of the first issue of The Real Berenzia, in which the book explained how Berenzia came to be, and the story about Symmachus, who was angry about the birth of Berenzia and vouched to marry her, after she becomes an adult. Basically, that's what his goal was, to get her to marry him and make a child. Anyway, let's continue. Berenzia grew like a weed transplanted to a Skyrim garden, a ward of Count Sven and his wife, the Lady Inga. Outwardly, that is, she thrived, but always there was a cold and empty place within. I've raised her as my own daughter, Lady Inga was wont to sigh as she sat gossiping when neighboring ladies came to visit. But she's a dark elf, what can you expect? Berenzia was not meant to overhear these words. At least she thought she was not. Her hearing was keener than that of her Nordic hosts. Other, less desirable dark elven traits evidently included pilfering, lying, and a little misplaced magic, just a small fire spell here and a little levitation spell there. And as she grew older, a keen interest in boys and men, who could provide very pleasant sensations, and to her astonishments, gifts as well. Ooh. She's reaching puberty, huh? Inga disapproved of this last for reasons incomprehensible to Berenzia, so she was careful to keep it as a secret as possible. She's wonderful with the children, Inga added, referring to her 5 sons, all younger than Berenzia. I don't think she'd ever let them come to harm. A tutor had been hired when Johnny was 6 and Berenzia 8, and they took their lessons together. She would have liked to train in arms as well, but the very idea scandalized Count Sven and Lady Inga, so Berenzia was given a small bow and allowed to play at target shooting with the boys. She watched them at arms practice when she could, sparred with them when no grown-up folks were about, and knew she was good as or better than they. She's very proud though, isn't she? One of the ladies would whisper to Inga, and Berenzia, pretending not to hear, would nod silently in agreement. She could not help but feel superior to the Count and his lady. There was something about them that provoked contempt. Afterwards, she came to learn that Sven and Inga were distant cousins of Darkmoor Keep's last titled residents, and she finally understood. They were posers, imposters, not rulers at all. At least they were not raised to rule. This thought made her strangely furious at them, a good clean hatred quite detached from resentment. She came to see them as disgusting and repellent insects who could be despised but never feared. Once a month a courier came from the Emperor, bringing a small bag of gold for Sven and Inga, and a larger bag of dried mushrooms from Morrowind for Berenzia, her favorite treat. On these occasions she was always made to look presentable, or at least as presentable as a skinny dark elf could be, made to look in Inga's eyes, before being summoned into the courier's presence for a brief interview. The same courier seldom came twice, but all of them looked her over in much the same way a farmer would look over a hog he is readying for market. In the spring of her 16th year, Berenzia thought the courier looked as if she were at last ready for market. Upon reflection, she decided she did not wish to be marketed. The stable boy, Straw, a big, muscular, blond lad, clumsy, gentle, affectionate, and rather simple, had been urging her to run off for some weeks now. Well, that story was explained in the biography of Berenzia books. Berenzia stole the bag of gold the courier had left, took the mushrooms from the storeroom, disguised herself as a boy in one of Johnny's old tunics and a pair of his cast-off breeches, and on one fine spring night she and Straw took the 2 best horses from the stable and rode hard through the night toward Whiterun, the nearest city of any importance and the place where Straw wanted to be. But Mournhold and Morrowind also lay eastward, and they drew Berenzia as a lodestone draws iron. In the morning they abandoned the horses at Berenzia's insistence. She knew they would be missed and tracked down, and she hoped to throw off any pursuers. They continued on foot until late afternoon, keeping to side roads, and slept for several hours in an abandoned hut. They went on at dusk and came to Whiterun city gates just before dawn. The funny thing is, of course, when this game came out, Skyrim wasn't there yet, so when you had to think of Whiterun, you probably had a totally different vision of the city you would have now when playing, when you have played Skyrim at least. So when I picture Whiterun, I clearly see the city that was portrayed in Skyrim. So that gives a little extra to the story, I guess. Berengia had prepared a pass of sorts for Straw, a makeshift document stating an errand to a temple in the city for a local village lord. She herself glided over the wall with the help of a levitation spell. She had reasoned, correctly as it turned out, that by now the gate guards would have been alerted to keep an eye out for a young dark elven girl and a Nordic boy traveling together. On the other hand, unaccompanied country yokels like Straw were a common enough sight. Alone and with papers, it was unlikely that he would draw attention. Her simple plan went smoothly. She met Straw at the temple, which was not far from the gate. She had been to Whiterun on a few previous occasions. Straw, however, had never been more than a few miles from Sven's estate, which was his birthplace. Together they made their way to a rundown inn in the poorer quarters of Whiterun. Gloved, cloaked and hooded against the morning chill, Berengia's dark skin and red eyes were not apparent, and no one paid any heed to them. They entered the inn separately. Straw paid the innkeeper for a single cubicle, an immense meal and 2 jugs of ale. Berengia sneaked in a few minutes later. They ate and drank together gleefully, rejoicing in their escape, and made love vigorously on a narrow cot. Well, well, well. Afterward, they fell into an exhausted, dreamless sleep. They stayed for a week at Whiterun. Straw earned a bit of money running errands, and Berengia burgled a few houses at night. She continued to dress as a boy. She cut her hair short and dyed her flame-red tresses jet black to further the disguise, and kept out of sight as much as possible. There were few dark elves in Whiterun. One day, Straw got them work as temporary guards for a merchant caravan traveling east. The one-armed sergeant looked her over dubiously. "Ha," he chuckled. "Dark elf, ain't ya? Like setting a wolf to guard the sheep, that is. Still I need arms, and we ain't going near enough. No Morrowind, so ye can betray us to your folk. Our homegrown bandits would as fain cut your throat as mine." Is that a Skyrim accent? Not sure. The sergeant turned to give Straw an appraising look. Then he spun back abruptly toward Berengia, whipping out his short sword, but she had her dagger out in the twinkling of an eye and was in a defensive stance. Straw drew his own knife and circled round to the man's rear. The sergeant dropped his blade and chuckled again. "Not bad, kids, not bad. How are you with yon bow, dark elf?" Berengia demonstrated her prowess briefly. "Aye, not bad at all. And you'll be keen of eye by night, boy, and of hear in tall times. A trusty dark elf makes as good a fighting man as any could ask for, I know. I served under Symmachus hisself afore I lost this arm, and got invalided outer the Emperor's army." Ah, Symmachus comes back to play. "We could betray them, I know folk who'd pay well," Straw said later as they bedded down for their last night at the ramshackle lodge. "Or rob them ourselves. They're very rich, those merchants are. Barry." Barry? That's his nickname. Her nickname. Berengia laughed. "Whatever would we do with so much money? And besides, we need their protection for traveling quite as much as they need ours. We could buy a little farm, you and me, Barry, and settle down all nice-like." "Peasant," Berengia thought scornfully. Straw was a peasant and harbored nothing but peasant dreams. But all she said was, "Not here, Straw. We're too close to Darkmoor still. We'll have other chances farther east." The caravan went only as far east as Sungard. The Emperor Tiberius Septim I had done much in the way of building relatively safe and regularly patrolled highways. But the tolls were steep, and this particular caravan kept to their side roads as much as possible to avoid them. This exposed them to the hazards of wayside robbers, both humans and orcish, and roving brigands bands of various races. But such were the perils of trade and profit. They had 2 such encounters before reaching Sungard. An ambush with Berengia's keen ears warned them of in plenty of time for them to circle about and surprise the lurkers, and a night attack by a mixed band of Khajiit humans and wood elves. The latter were a skilled band, and even Berengia did not hear them sneaking up in time to give much warning. This time the fighting was fierce. The attackers were driven off, but 2 of the caravan's other guards were slain, and Straw got a nasty cut on his thigh before he and Berengia managed to gash his Khajiit assailant's throat. Berengia rather enjoyed the life. The garrulous sergeant had taken a liking to her, and she spent most of her evenings sitting around the campfire listening to his tales of campaigning in Morrowind with Tiber Septim and General Symmachus. This Symmachus had been made general after Mournhold fell, the sergeant said. He's a fine soldier, boy, Symmachus is, but there was more than soldiery involved in the Morrowind business, if you take my meaning, but well, you know all about that, I expect. No, I don't remember, Berengia said, trying to sound nonchalant. I've lived most of my life in Skyrim. My mother married a Skyrim man. They're both dead, though. Tell me, what happened to the Lord and Lady of Mournhold? The sergeant shrugged. I ain't never heard. Dead, I expect. 'Twas a lot of fighting, afore the armistice got signed. It's pretty quiet now, maybe too quiet, like a calm before a storm. Say, boy, you going back there? Maybe, Berengia said. The truth was that she was drawn irresistibly to Morrowind and Mournhold, like a moth to a burning house. Straw sensed it and was unhappy about it. He was unhappy anyway, since they could not bed together, and she was supposed to be a boy. Berengia rather missed it too, but not as much as Straw did, seemingly. The sergeant wanted them to sign on for the return trip, but gave them a bonus nonetheless when they turned the offer down and parchments of recommendation. Straw wanted to settle down permanently near Sungard, but Berengia insisted on continuing their travels east. I am the Queen of Mournhold by rights, she said, unsure whether it was true or was it just a daydream she had made up as a lost bewildered child. I want to go home, I need to go home. That at least was true. After a few weeks they managed to get places in another caravan heading east. By early winter they were at Riften and nearing the Morrowind border. But the weather had grown severe as the days passed and they were told no merchant caravans would be setting forth till mid-spring. Berengia stood on top of the city walls and stared across the deep gorge that separated Riften from the snow-clad mountain wall guarding Morrowind beyond. Barry, Straw said gently, Mournhold's a long way off yet, nearly as far as we've come already. And the lands between are wild, full of wolves and bandits and orcs and still worse creatures. We'll have to wait for spring. There's Stilgrat Tower, Barry said, referring to the dark elven township that had grown up around an ancient minaret guarding the border between Skyrim and Morrowind. The bridge guards won't let me across, Barry. They're crack Imperial troops. They can't be bribed. If you go alone. I won't try and stop you. But what will you do? Stilgrat Tower is full of Imperial soldiers. Will you become a washing woman for them, or a camp follower? No, Berengia said slowly, thoughtfully. Actually, the idea was not entirely unappealing. She was sure she could earn a modest living by sleeping with the soldiers. Well, she's a nasty one, isn't she? She had a few adventures of that sort as they crossed Skyrim, when she dressed as a woman and slipped away from Straw. She'd only been looking for a bit of variety. Straw was sweet but dull. She'd been startled but extremely pleased when the men she picked up offered her money afterward. Straw had been unhappy about it, though, and would shout for a while and then sulk for days afterward if he caught her at it. He was quite jealous. He'd even threatened to leave her. Not that he ever did, or could. But the Imperial guards were a tough and brutal lot by all accounts, and Berengia had heard some very ugly stories during their treks. The ugliest of them by far had come from the lips of ex-army veterans around the caravan campfire and were proudly recounted. They had been trying to shock her and Straw, she realized, but she also comprehended that there was some truth behind the wild tales. Straw hated that kind of dirty talk and hated it more that she had to hear it, but there was a part of him that was fascinated nevertheless. Berengia sensed this and had encouraged Straw to seek out other women, but he said he didn't want anyone else but her. She told him candidly she didn't feel that way about him, but she did like him better than anyone else. Then why do you go with other men? Straw had asked on one occasion. I don't know, Straw sighed. They say dark elven women are like that. Berengia smiled and shrugged. I don't know, or no, maybe I do. Yes, I do know. She turned and kissed him affectionately. I guess that's all the explanation there is. Well, she likes to have sex. That's sure. Alright. Who wouldn't, though? The Real Berengia Volume 2. Ready for 4 more books. I guess these are as long as the first one. So let's continue. Written by Anonymous again, the Hacker Association. Berengia and Straw settled into Riften for the winter. taking a cheap room to the slummier section of town. Berenzia wanted to join the Thieves Guild, knowing there would be trouble if she were caught freelancing. One day in a barroom, she caught the eye of a known member of the guild, a bold young Khajiit named Theris. She offered to bet him if he would sponsor her membership. He looked her over, grinning, and agreed, but said she'd still have to pass an initiation. What sort of initiation? Ah, Theris said, pay up first, sweetness. This passage has been censored by order of the temple. Okay. I wonder if we can find the uncensored version somewhere. Straw was going to kill her, and maybe Theris too. What in Tamriel had possessed her to do such a thing? She cast an apprehensive look around the room, but the other patrons had lost interest and gone back to their own business. She did not recognize any of them. This wasn't the inn where she and Straw were staying. With luck, it'd be a while or never before Straw found out. Theris was by far the most exciting and attractive man she had yet met. He not only told her about the skills she needed to become a member of the Thieves Guild, but also trained her in them himself or else introduced her to people who could. So there is actually the Thieves Guild in Riften, of course, in Skyrim. This is long after these events, so Theris wouldn't be around anymore. But again, it leaves you a great image of the world or the story that is told here. I can see Riften while it's being told, so that's funny. Among these was a woman who knew something about magic. Katisha was a plump and matronly Nord. She was married to a smith, had 2 teenage children, and was perfectly ordinary and respectable, except that she was very fond of cats, and by logical inference, their humanoid counterparts, the Khajiit, had a talent for certain kinds of magic and cultivated rather odd friends. She taught Berenzia an invisibility spell and schooled her in other forms of stealth and disguise. Katisha mingled magical and non-magical talents freely, using one set to enhance the other. She was not a member of the Thieves Guild, but was fond of Theris in a motherly sort of way. Berenzia warmed to her, as she never had toward any woman, and over the next few weeks she told Katisha all about herself. She brought Straw there too sometimes. Straw approved of Katisha, but not of Theris. Theris found Straw interesting, and suggested to Berenzia that they arrange what he called a threesome. Absolutely not, Berenzia said firmly, grateful that Theris had broached the subject in private for once. He wouldn't like it. I wouldn't like it. Theris smiled his charming triangular feline smile and sprawled lazily on his chair, stretching his limbs and curling his tail. You might be surprised, both of you. Pairing is so boring. Berenzia answered him with a glare. Or maybe you wouldn't like it with that country bumpkin of yours, sweetness. Would you mind if I brought along another friend? Yes, I would. If you're bored with me, you and your friend can find someone else. She was a member of the Thieves Guild now. She had passed her initiation. She found Theris useful, but not essential. Maybe she was a bit bored with him too. The funny thing is, books like this and other books address adult issues like this. Themes like sex and little, the range of sex and adult stuff. And I think in the Elder Scrolls games that's not really handled the same way as in books. You won't find any, this is more like The Witcher. It handles adult stuff very well in game. It shows you actually the deeds of sex. But the Elder Scrolls is just a little prude, maybe, just on the safe side, I guess. But I would like a more adult version of the Elder Scrolls, maybe later on. There are stories in this book, so why not in the real game? Anyway, she talked to Katisha about her problems with men, or what she thought of as her problems with men. Katisha shook her head and told her she was looking for love, not sex, that she'd know the right man when she found him, that neither Straw nor Theris was the right one for her. Berenzia cocked her head to one side quizzically. They say dark elven women are pro something? Prostitutes, she said, although she was dubious. You mean promiscuous? Although some do become prostitutes, I suppose, Katisha said as an afterthought. Elves are promiscuous when they're young, but you'll outgrow it. Perhaps you're beginning to already. She added hopefully she liked Berenzia, had grown to be quite fond of her. You ought to meet some nice elven boys, though. If you go on keeping company with Khajiits and humans and what have you, you'll find yourself pregnant in next to no time. Berengia smiled involuntarily at the thought. I'd like that, I think. But it would be inconvenient, wouldn't it? Babies are a lot of trouble, and I don't even have my own house yet. How old are you, Barry? 17? Well, you've a year or two yet before you're fertile, unless you're very unlucky. Elves don't have children readily with other elves after that. Even so, you'll be alright if you stick with them. And with that, I'll stop for a moment again and read on in the next episode.